Saturday mornings in Naperville usually had a rhythm. The sun came in soft through the east-facing kitchen windows, catching the edge of the marble counter where Mia liked to sit with her tea. The faint hum of lawnmowers would start up in the distance, competing with the sprinkler's soft tick-tick-tick in our neighbor's yard. I'd make coffee, she'd scroll her phone, and we'd ease into the weekend without much urgency. That morning started the same way, at least for me. I'd been up before her, straightening the living room, wiping down the counters. She'd left her big cream-colored tote bag on the kitchen island, slouched open like she'd just dropped it and forgotten about it. We'd scribbled a grocery list the night before, and I figured it might be inside. I wasn't looking for trouble. If anything, I was looking for a reminder of normalcy, something as mundane as milk, eggs, bread. But instead of a list, my fingers caught on a stiff fold of paper tucked into the inner pocket. It was a receipt. Boutique name at the top. The Goldener, downtown Chicago. Not a chain. Not the kind of place you book for a corporate event unless your corporate event includes champagne on arrival and fret sheets. I'd been there once for a cousin's wedding, and even then, the rates had made my eyes water. One night, late checkout, 2 guests. The words sat there, blunt in black ink, while my coffee maker hissed behind me like it was trying to fill the silence. My thumb traced the line that said extra guest fee applied, as if reading it again might change the meaning. Tucked into the same folded page was a paper keycard holder. On the back, in hurried handwriting, FL 14 to 1:30 p.m. The numbers pressed into the card sleeve like whoever wrote them had been in a rush. I just stood there, the bag still hanging from my arm, feeling that small, cold click in the chest you get when a puzzle piece slides into place. Except this one didn't belong to the picture Mia had painted of her week. She told me she had been in Schaumburg on Thursday for an off-site with her team. Meetings all day, dinner afterward. Then she'd stayed with a colleague overnight to save the commute. I'd pictured her in a Marriott by the highway, not in a downtown hotel with keycards and late checkouts. I heard her coming down the hall before I could decide whether to put the receipt back or just set it on the counter like evidence. She was in one of those loose gray sweatshirts she wore on weekends, hair twisted up with a pencil, barefoot. The normal picture. "What's this?" I asked, holding the paper halfway between us. Not accusing, not gentle. She blinked once, the way people do when their mind is shifting gears before their face catches up. Then she smiled, small, like it was nothing, and took the receipt between her fingers. "Oh, that team booking for the offsite. We blocked a few rooms downtown in case we had to meet with clients." She looked at the keycard sleeve like it was an afterthought. Front desk must have mixed up the folio, probably put the wrong number of guests. Happens all the time. Her voice was light, even a little amused, as if the idea that I might think anything of it was almost funny. Then she leaned a hip against the counter and started talking about her Monday schedule. How she'd have to get in early, how her assistant kept messing up the calendar invites. It was a clean redirect. I could almost admire the mechanics of it. She didn't deny. She didn't elaborate. She moved the conversation 3 exits down the highway before I could ask what she meant by clients. But my mind was still in that cramped space between the words 2 guests and late checkout. I pictured her handing over the card at the desk, someone beside her, maybe close enough that their bag brushed hers. The floor number scrawled on the sleeve. Was that her handwriting? It didn't look like it. I nodded slowly, letting her think the conversation had been put to bed, but my ears were ringing. Mia was already halfway through describing some project deadline when I realized I hadn't heard a word. My focus was on the tote bag, still open, and whether I'd find more if I kept looking. I didn't. Not right then. She drifted over to the stove, asking if I wanted eggs, and I let the moment go. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see what she'd do next. It wasn't the first time I'd felt something was off, but it was the first time I could hold the feeling in my hand. Paper, ink, and the certainty that a piece of her week was hidden from me, dressed up as work logistics. I slid the receipt back into her bag while she reached into the fridge, careful not to make a sound. If she noticed it had been moved later, she didn't say anything. I didn't go hunting after that receipt. That's what I told myself, anyway. I made a second cup of coffee, sat across from Mia, nodded along to her chatter about Monday's calls, and pretended to file the whole thing under front desk mix-up. But when a story doesn't balance, your brain keeps re-adding the numbers. The totals refused to match. It started with her shared location. Months ago, she'd asked me to disable it for battery, like she was doing me a favor. You hate notifications, Evan. Back then, it hadn't seemed like a hill to die on. We weren't the couple who tracked each other, except we had been quietly during storms or late drives. Now, the setting was still off. I noticed it one night when the power flickered and I texted, "You close?" And she replied with a photo of a spreadsheet that had tomorrow's date. Then the odometer. Mia drives the SUV to the train most days, 10 miles round trip. Lately, the miles stacked up like someone had put a brick on the accelerator. 40 here, 60 there. I told myself maybe she'd taken the scenic route to clear her head. The same head that started smelling like a perfume I'd never bought. Light, expensive, like pear over clean linen. When I hugged her, it clung to the collar of my shirt and followed me into Monday. There were receipts, too. A health club across town, the kind with eucalyptus towels, and a juice bar that named smoothies like houseplants. Neither of us belonged there. "Client pass," she said when I asked. "One of the founders swears by the sauna." She rolled that word founders like a marble against her teeth, enjoying its shine. Her lingerie drawer transformed quietly. New sets with tags I didn't recognize. Fabrics that looked too fragile for our washing machine. She laughed it off as retail therapy and a sale. Our joint account showed the same amount pulled in cash again and again. "Tips," she said. "Work lunches. Valet." Strange how all the places that needed tips were downtown. Message threads vanished. Entire conversations would appear as orphaned bubbles that began mid-thought. Mia started flipping her phone face down like it was modest. The screen would light, she'd smile without reading, and then turn to ask me if we had any paprika. She scheduled evening meetings that somehow lined up with Bulls home games, with festivals, with the calendar of downtown events a radio host would list between songs. On nights the city pulsed, she was indispensable. Her silences changed shape, too. It wasn't the quiet of long comfort. It was the silence of someone rehearsing. Her smiles were photos taken seconds too late. Staged, lips but no eyes, delivered like a presentation slide. Our routines frayed. She stopped lingering on the couch after dinner. She ate standing up, fork in one hand, phone in the other, as if sitting would invite questions she wasn't ready to answer. Busyness filled the house like white noise. Calendars spread across the table, color-coded blocks, back-to-back calls. She'd sigh and say, "It's just the quarter end." But the quarter kept extending, as if the year had grown more quarters while I wasn't looking. She stayed up late sending emails that produced instant replies for a city that was supposedly asleep. I started keeping a small notebook in my nightstand, not because I wanted to build a case, but because I was tired of gaslighting myself. Date, odd thing, plausible story. Thursday, miles plus 62. Friday, cash withdrawal ATM by the Riverwalk. Saturday, new lipstick shade, the kind with a marketing name instead of a color. After hours. Tuesday, Uber ride home from a block that only has a valet stand and a swanky lobby. Every entry had an alibi attached to it like a post-it. Team bookings, founder's sauna, battery life, mix UPS. If I pushed, the story stretched to cover the hole. If I didn't, the hole widened. Even the house felt different. Keys migrated to unfamiliar bowls. A spare key card, a different one, lived in her makeup bag for a week before disappearing. A sweater I'd never seen was suddenly old. She laughed at reels from accounts I didn't recognize and said they were agency inside jokes. When I offered to come to a Thursday happy hour, she kissed my cheek and said, "It's mostly vendors." Like that made me a non-fit. I used to be invited to everything. Now I was a category error. Some nights she'd come home wired and talk too fast, spacing her words with sips of water like she was cooling off a machine. Other nights she arrived quiet and stared at the TV while the screensaver floated a city skyline across the room. When I reached for her hand, her fingers felt restless, like they were waiting for a different set to interlace with. I told myself to be generous. Work was intense. The city demands. We were both tired and a little bruised by the last few years. Job changes, a parent's surgery, the endless logistics of adulthood that make romance feel like a calendar invite you keep snoozing. So I counterweight the ledger. I plan small things. A Tuesday dinner reservation at the Italian place where the waiter knows our names. A Saturday drive to Starved Rock for a trail she'd said she missed. She accepted the first and canceled the. Whenever I leaned in with an actual question, she deflected to tasks. Did you pay the ComEd bill? Can you remind me to switch the car wash membership? She'd bring up the dog we said we'd adopt when our schedules calmed down. As if future plans could cork the bottle of the present. I began noticing the choreography. If I stood in a doorway, she'd take a step that put the island between us. If I asked where she parked, she'd answer with a story about traffic on Michigan Avenue. When we lay in bed, her phone charged on her side on silent, face down, as if it were sleeping too. Mine, suddenly, was too loud. Little scenes replayed in my head like clips from a documentary I hadn't seen the beginning of. The day the shared location turned off. The morning after she came home with damp hair and said the gym showers were like a spa. The time she asked me to grab her phone and then remembered, too late, and lunged, a fraction too hard, because it had been propped open on a message that started with a heart. I wasn't looking to catch her. I was trying to locate us. Where did we end and the scripts begin? When did the spontaneity become strategy? On a Tuesday evening, I parked in the lot by the river and watched the road that feeds the commuter train. It was nothing, I told myself, just checking the timing. Her train arrived, a ribbon of silver sliding into the station. The crowd spilled, and after a minute she appeared, but instead of walking toward the lot, she turned left, toward the rideshare pick-you-piss. 10 minutes later, a car with blacked-out windows pulled in. She got in without looking back. The app on my phone insisted her destination was. The next day, the SUV smelled faintly like that new perfume and, beneath it, like whiskey. The miles were up another 34. She said she'd swung by a client's office in West Loop to drop a sample. I nodded. The ledger gained another line. By then, my notebook had stopped pretending to be neutral. The ink got darker at the end of sentences. I started writing questions in the margins that I didn't ask out loud. Who is he? How many lies fit inside a week? At what point does a pattern become a confession? Some nights I fell asleep with my hand on the nightstand drawer, like a guard. I kept waiting for a clean answer, something that would resolve the math without blowing up the house. But the pattern kept repeating, like a song you can't turn off because the next track is worse. And under the hum of errands and calendar invites, something else began to buzz. The sense that I was being managed, not loved. That I had been assigned a role, steady husband, reliable cover, the man who asks how your day was and accepts busy as a full paragraph. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You can only decide what to do with the knowledge the next time the phone lights up and lands face down on the table as if hiding is just good manners. The receipt had been the first sharp corner. The pattern was the second. But the proof, real, unshakable proof, came almost by accident, the way a loose thread can unravel a whole sweater with one careless tug. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. I was in my home office, trying to get through a pile of reports, when Mia texted to say she'd be working late with the team. Same phrasing as always. Same soft cushion of words that, over time, had lost all weight. I barely even reacted. I'd learned to file those messages under probably not work. But around 7, I went to grab my laptop charger from the living room. Her iPad was there, screen lit, open to her Photos app. Mia isn't careless with her devices. If anything, she's religious about locking them. But she must have stepped away in the middle of syncing something to the cloud. The album wasn't even hidden, just a grid of thumbnails. Most were the usual. Snapsh *TS from meetings, screensh *TS of meal ideas, random memes. And then my eyes snagged on a strip of images that didn't fit the rhythm, low light, neon-edged, with the grain and glow of a nightlife lounge. I tapped one. The photo filled the screen. Mia, leaning across a small table, her face lit by a soft wash of purple from an overhead bar light. Her eyes were closed. Her hand was curled into the shirt collar of a man I didn't recognize. He was younger, early 20s maybe, hair pushed back in a way that tried hard to look unstyled. I'd later learn his name, Noah, but in that moment, all I could see was the angle of his mouth pressed against hers. It wasn't a work hug. It wasn't even a too many drinks moment. It was deliberate, anchored, the kind of kiss that comes after a build-up. I swiped left. Another photo. Her laughing with her head tipped back, his hand on her knee under the table. Swipe again. The two of them sharing a plated dessert. Small portions, high garnish, the kind of thing you order when you're trying to stretch the night, not fill your stomach. My breath felt thick. I backed out of the album, hoping I'd misread something, but the thumbnails sat there in sequence like a film strip with no alternate ending. On the kitchen counter was her laptop bag. I don't know why I opened it. Habit, compulsion, the kind of momentum that carries you once you've seen the first half of a rec. Inside was her work folder. Underneath, a printed e-folio from a hotel, the Goldener, again. The same week as the lounge photos. The charges were itemized in neat type. Room rate, late checkout fee, and under dining, a line for chef's tasting menu, 2 guests. There was even a note from the concierge. Second guest added at check-in. If the photos were a punch, the e-folio was the drop after the punch, the moment you realize gravity has you by the throat. All those team meetings, all the shrugging about group dinners, it wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a ledger with dates, times, amounts, and a companion. I thought back to her pattern of off-sites. The way her perfume lingered in the car, the blank spaces in her text history. Noah's face, barely older than the interns she used to mentor, slid into those gaps like it had been made to fit. The strangest part was how quiet the room felt. No rush of blood, no need to shout. Just the weight of the obvious. Finally sitting down at my table like an overdue guest. By the time she came home that night, I had moved the iPad back, closed the folder, and put everything exactly where it had been. She breezed in with that thin, post-downtown energy, hair slightly out of place, blazer over her arm, the smell of something sweet and citrus clinging to her. She kissed my cheek like you'd greet a neighbor. "How was your day?" she asked, toeing off her shoes. "Pretty much what I expected," I said, and let her think it was a throwaway line. Because now I wasn't chasing hints. I was holding the map. And there's a strange sort of calm that comes when you finally stop guessing which direction you're being led. The week after I found the photos and the hotel folio, something in me shifted. Not a snap, not an explosion. More like a lever quietly switching tracks. I'd spent months second-guessing myself, tiptoeing around her moods, collecting scraps of logic to explain away gut feelings. Now I didn't need explanations. I had the truth in sharp, color-saturated focus. That's when Mia made her maid remark. It happened on a Sunday morning, a few days after her latest late work night. We were in the kitchen, me clearing the dishwasher, her flipping through a design magazine she never actually read, just skimmed for photos. She was talking about the cleaner we used once a month, Anna, a woman who'd been with us for years and kept the place running when work swallowed both our schedules. Mia wrinkled her nose at something Anna had left slightly out of place and said, "Honestly, she's just a maid. It's not that hard to get it right." She said it in that offhand, dismissive way people use when they're not expecting to be challenged, flat, almost bored. But it landed like a thud in my chest. Not because of Anna exactly, but because the tone was the same one she used with me lately. You're here to serve, to keep the background in order, to never step into the spotlight. I didn't argue. I just nodded, made a mental note, and started moving money. That afternoon, I logged into our joint accounts and began untangling. I shut down the auto payments for her credit cards, pulled my name from the utilities she never remembered to pay on time, froze the joint card she favored for client dinners that somehow always came with valet charges and boutique receipts. By the time she was done with her Sunday facial mask, I'd moved the bulk of our shared savings into a separate account in my name only. Quiet, clinical, nothing she could accuse me of as long as the mortgage stayed paid and the lights stayed on. I didn't announce any of it. I wanted her to feel the discovery, not the warning. A week later, the discovery came. She was at some boutique in Oak Brook with 2 of her friends. Women she collected like Instagram props, all hair gloss and curated, effortless outfits. She tried to run her card at the counter, and it declined. Tried another. Declined again. One of the friends covered the bill, and they laughed it off in the moment, but Naperville's social circles are stitched tighter than linen. By that evening, I'd already heard from a neighbor's wife who'd heard from her yoga partner that Mia's cards were frozen in front of everyone. It spread through local group chats like a spark in dry grass. People love a fall from a curated height. It didn't take long for the little ripples to reach her brand. Mia had spent the last 2 years positioning herself as a connector, hosting brunches for the neighborhood's Women in Leadership group, collaborating with a couple of boutique sponsors for product placements on her Instagram, even speaking at a local panel about balancing career and home. But the panel organizer was also in the Oak Brook group chat. One by one, the people who benefited from associating with her polished image decided it was safer to drift away. The boutique where she'd modeled spring scarves quietly ended their collaboration. The salon canceled her discounted styling slot, citing schedule changes. The brunch she was supposed to host next month officially postponed indefinitely. I didn't have to say a word. Her remark about Anna, that casual contempt, had stripped away the thin sympathy some people still had for her. Now, she wasn't the overworked creative balancing at all. She was the woman who thought herself too good for the people who held her life together. And without the veneer of that network, the story underneath began to leak. I never confirmed or denied anything. But I also didn't close my laptop when a well-placed email was visible on the kitchen counter, or lower my voice when a friend on the phone said, "After what she did?" Naperville thrives on implication. You don't need the headline when the subtext is delicious enough. I could see it hitting her in stages. First, the confusion. Little furrows in her brow when a text from a collab partner went unanswered, or when a group chat went oddly quiet after she messaged. Then the defensiveness, overcompensating with perfectly staged Instagram stories, all sunlit desk sh*ts and latte art. And finally, the pinch of panic when the invitations stopped. Our house began to feel like a theater between shows. She'd move from room to room with her phone in her hand, refreshing like she could will the validation back into existence. Her voice got sharper when she answered spam calls, like she needed someone to pick a fight with just to prove she could still land a blow. And through it all, I stayed still, paid the mortgage, took care of my work, nodded when she tried to pull me into a conversation about how weird people have been lately. I didn't give her a villain she could rally against. I let the vacuum do its work. The woman who had once been so careful to maintain her image now found herself without an audience. And it wasn't just the public part that collapsed. Inside the house, her energy shifted, too. She stopped making little digs at my schedule or habits. She started offering to handle small chores she'd ignored for years. She even asked once if I wanted her to cook dinner. It wasn't an apology. It was survival instinct, the reflex of someone who feels the ground moving and starts throwing things overboard to keep the boat afloat. That's when I knew the balance had shifted. The months I'd spent trying to keep up, to explain away the inconsistencies, to be reasonable. That era was over. She wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. And she knew it. The house felt different after that week, though not in the way people imagine when they hear home improvement. No new furniture, no fresh coat of paint, just a shift in the air. Quieter, less cluttered. The sort of order that doesn't announce itself but slowly makes you notice how much noise there used to be. I'd hired Anna, not as a monthly cleaner now, but as a meticulous, almost forensic helper. 3 mornings a week, she came in with her canvas tote of supplies, the kind of efficiency that looks like choreography. She didn't just vacuum and dust. She sorted. She labeled. She logged. Keys went on hooks by the door. Spare change in jars. Every drawer got dividers. Even the junk drawer, that graveyard of batteries and rubber bands, now looked like it was ready for a magazine shoot. I told her once she didn't have to be so thorough. She just smiled and said, "Clean is easy. Clear is better." Clear. That was the word for it. When I opened the mail now, there weren't piles to deal with later. Receipts went into folders by month. Bank statements in another. The quiet hum of order replaced the rustle of paper and the constant search for things that had been just here. Mia noticed, of course. She walked in one evening and paused in the hallway, looking at the labeled hooks for keys. "Wow," she said. "The way someone comments on a stranger's house during an open house tour. You're getting organized. Helps keep track of things," I said. I left the sentence open, but her eyes flicked toward the hooks and then away, like she'd heard the subtext. That's when she started her own little countermove. Suddenly, she was the perfect homemaker. Candles lit before I got home, folded laundry on my side of the bed, fridge stocked with produce she hadn't touched in years. She baked twice in 1 week. The last time she'd baked, it was from a boxed mix for a potluck 3 summers ago. It wasn't reconciliation. I could feel it in the way she moved, too precise, too quick to volunteer a task. This wasn't about rebuilding int asterisk Macy. This was about covering tracks. A frantic scrubbing of the stage before the spotlight came back on. But the thing about a stage is you can feel when the audience has left. She was putting on the performance, but there was no one to clap. I knew why. Noah had stopped appearing online. His Instagram went quiet, his tagged photos dried up, and the lounge where I'd first seen their faces pressed together posted new staff bios without him. The casual bragging she used to absorb like sun. Photos of cocktails, group sh*TS where his hand was just on her shoulder, was gone. I don't know if he ghosted her or if there was an ugly end, but the result was the same. Silence. And in that silence, her public flare-ups began. The first was in the grocery store parking lot. I only knew about it because a neighbor mentioned it later, laughing in that half-sympathetic way people do when gossip tastes good. Mia had been yelling into her phone, pacing between the car and the cart corral. Something about promises and, "You think you can just walk away?" Someone caught part of it on video. 2 days later, she was at it again, this time outside the coffee shop on Main. Different outfit, same red-faced shouting. A passing delivery driver recorded that one, too. By the end of the week, both clips were floating in our HOA group's chat thread under the heading, "Classy." It didn't matter that they didn't know who she was yelling at. The visuals told their own story. The woman who used to post motivational quotes about grace and gratitude now barking into a phone in full daylight. **TS spread. The irony was too rich for people to resist. Anna never commented, but I caught her smirk once when she saw Mia's face tight with whatever fight she was losing. She didn't need to say a word. Anna understood the dynamic better than most. When you remove the secret audience, the lover, the confidants, the people on the sidelines ready to believe the curated image, you see the real driver. It wasn't remorse fueling Mia's sudden domestic zeal. It was panic. Not about losing me, but about losing control. Noah had been the gravitational center of her new orbit. Without him, the whole thing wobbled. And here's the part that sat in my chest like a stone. She hadn't once tried to talk about us. Not really. No late-night confessions, no. I've been thinking about what we had. Just this surface work. Cookies, folded towels, a stocked pantry. While the foundation stayed untouched. It made the house even quieter. Cleaner, yes, but in that sterile way a staged listing is clean. No fingerprints. No trace of real life. I realized one night, sitting at the kitchen table while Anna wiped down the counters, that I wasn't angry in the same way anymore. It had calcified into something else, clarity. I didn't want to fix what had been broken, because it hadn't been an accident. It had been dismantled, piece by piece, by someone who needed an exit and thought she could keep all the furniture on her way out. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the clips of her public scenes had been pinned in the neighborhood's private forum. The caption under one read, "From vision board to viral." People laughed. Others pretended to feel bad. But every chuckle was another thread pulled from the image she'd worked so hard to wrap around herself. I didn't need to lift a finger. The house was orderly. The finances were mine. The gossip did its own quiet work outside. And Mia? She was left pacing a stage with no one watching, wondering how the script had flipped without her seeing it.